Good morning again. This is the last lecture we have, and there's probably going to be two. And these lectures are on the structural and functional adaptation of fishes. This is the last part of the fishes chapter that we're going to go through today. Textbooks online and textbooks, the new textbook, please just check. There don't seem to be too many changes, so here you can just refer to your textbook online. We're going to be talking about locomotion in water, neutral buoyancy and the swim bladder, respiration, osmotic regulation, migration, and reproduction. Okay, those are the different components. I am recording this, guys, and I will load this onto the Dropbox, the lecture as well, when we're done. First of all, locomotion in water. We've been talking about how the osteichthyes, teleos in particular, are very well adapted to move and utilize their structure, their form, to move in water. And what is the most important thing about it is the musculature of the fish and these zigzag-shaped muscles, which we said was also one of the characteristics of chordates, that at some point they have these myomers. That's the shape of their muscles. But that has been removed from one of the 5 characteristic chordate features. Okay? I've just written your exams and your tests, so now I'm thinking about these characteristics and where they apply in your tests and your exams. It's very important, guys, that you go back through to the first lectures and go through your data. It all comes together. Trunk and tail that allows them to propel themselves through water. And then this is the trunk part of the fish, the head, the trunk, and the tail. Okay? And the trunk with its muscles and the tail with its ability to use it to propel through the water is what is important characteristics. Flexible fish like eels, they use the serpentine movement. And you can see what happens is based on the shape, how the eel will use his body to push and propel himself through the water. But it all comes from his body. So it's very difficult because it's this round body that he's using to push the water away from him as he moves his body. Compare that to a fish with a nice tail, and you can see with the tail, they use a lot of the musculature from their thorax, but you can see how they're able to push the thrust from their tail portion. And because it's a nice big fin, it's a big fin, and they can use that fin as a paddle that they can push themselves through the water. It's not very efficient. The serpentine movement is not very efficient, and they don't get high speeds. Fast swimmers are less flexible. Bony undulations are limited to caudal region. Okay, this is just an example of the trouts and how the trout swim. Many fast swimmers are streamlined with grooves, so their fins can lie flat in the water. You can see that they can lie flat and they can keep themselves in position. And then what's really important is the shape of the fish. As you change your shape, you become more... Think of aerodynamics. Can you think of when you're making a fast sports car? You're trying to make sure that the aerodynamics, the shape of the fish and the friction and the drag that it produces is minimized. And this is a great shape. So we've actually mimicked this when we look at airplanes and we look at some cars, we mimic this type of shape. Can you see it's very similar to the birds have that same type of shape to be able to be aerodynamic in air. What's also important, if you look at the different types of caudal fins, their tails, as they become more sickle-shaped and stiff, they have more ability, less drag, and more ability to thrust themselves through the water. So the very, very fast fish, like an African tiger fish, has this sickle-shaped fin. Okay. Very easy. So fish are well adapted to move in water. Well adapted. Especially the osteichthyes, the more developed fishes. Okay. Great ability to move in water. That's quite simple. Now we look at buoyancy and the swim bladder. Do you remember we spoke about different animals that they have swim bladders or not? They have different types of features that help them to maintain their position in the water. It's very important for different species. Sharks, they need to move constantly to avoid sinking. So a shark doesn't have a lot of internal ability like oils or a swim bladder to keep its buoyancy. It has to keep itself up. So a shark constantly has to keep up and swim if it wants to keep its buoyancy in the water. The heterocercal tail of a shark provides lift as it moves from side to side as well. So the heterocercal tail with a lobe on the top and a small lobe on the bottom, by thrusting itself through the water, it's actually propelling itself up constantly to help the fish so that it can actually move upwards. And a shark can then move his fixed fins down if he wants to stay in a straight line. So he has to position his fins. Do you remember the difference between chondrichthyes and osteichthyes, for example? Chondrichthyes, the different sharks, their fins are fixed. They can move them slightly, but they're fixed. They've got some muscles in them. Where an osteichthyes fish can do whatever he likes with his fins. Okay, that also helps them in terms of their movement. Broad head and angled, stiff fins that add lift as well. Large livers have fatty hydrocarbons that aid in buoyancy. So fat and oils don't mix with water. Okay? The density of oil is lighter than water. Oil floats on water. If you put oil in your cooking pot, it floats on water. So all of these fatty acids, fatty substances or cells that fish have, especially in their livers and other organs, they do help them become a little more buoyant. But overall, if the shark stops swimming, he'll sink. Okay, that's what you need to know. The liver is a large sack of buoyant oil. Just helps them. Okay. Bony fishes use a gas-filled space to regulate their buoyancy. What is the swim bladder derived from? What does it come from? Embryonic stage, it comes from the esophagus. Okay, it's a swim bladder, so it's a pouch that's filled with air, helps with gaseous exchange between the fish take gas out of the water, they fill their swim bladder up, and it helps them to regulate some of their gaseous regulation, homeostasis in their body as well. That was very useful. So in order to help them balance the chemistry in their blood and the oxygen in their blood, homeostasis, the swim bladder is very useful in the osteichthyes. Swim bladders are absent in tunas, abyssal fishes. Abyssal fishes are the fishes that live very, very deep in the abyss of the sea, very deep holes in the sea, because they don't want to go up. You see, so a lot of them are rudimentary. They do have remnant features that were or showed that during the embryonic development, there are signs that they share the characteristics of other osteichthyes in the sense of a swim bladder, but they don't develop a swim bladder because they don't want to swim up. Bottom dread is bony fishes will sink without the swim bladder because they are denser than water. All bony fishes, eh? Fishes must be able to regulate the gas in the swim bladder. At depth, the gas will compress and the fish will sink. As it rises to the surface, the gas will expand and the fish will rise faster. This is an issue that we have when people go fishing. So what they do is when people go fishing and they catch fish, if they catch a fish very deep in the ocean, and as they start to bring the fish up, the pressure around the fish starts to reduce. The pressure, because the water in the air above the fish is putting pressure on that organism. And when you hook it and you're bringing it up, you're forcing it to come up. And as it's coming up, the pressure is decreasing. And as the pressure decreases, you can see like a bottle of water, a bottle of air. If you took the bottle of air down to the bottom of the sea, it would be squashed flat. But as it comes up, it starts to expand again. You see? And what happens if I put air in the bottle when it was deep and I start to lift it up towards the surface? It expands too much. And their swim bladders burst, or the swim bladders come out their mouth. The swim bladders cause them to pop in their bodies. You understand that? Because their swim bladder is full of air already. So that is an issue that anglers face. And what they do is they actually usually carry a needle and they burst the swim bladder so that they can just let the fishes, the oxygen and their pressure reduce. And when they release the fish can then swim down. But now the fish has the problem because now he's full of air. So he can't go down. And they bob on the surface and they can't go down. You see? So if you take the air out, the fish has got no more buoyancy. He can go down and then he can, they do heal from their wounds, and then they can start to use their swim bladder again. Okay, but if you catch a fish from very deep and you don't pop his swim bladder, he can't get down, he's just going to be eaten or die. Okay, crazy, eh? Gas may be removed in two ways. Physostomus. Fishes are more primitive, like trout, for example. They have a pneumatic duct that connects the swim bladder and the esophagus. So they have a small duct. Small duct is like a little pipe that connects between their swim bladder and their esophagus, so they can actually release air straight from their swim bladder into their esophagus, and it can be released out of their mouth. Gas must be secreted into the swim bladder from the blood, although some species can gulp air to fill the swim bladder. Okay, some species can gulp air. Physoclistus fishes, like the teleos and the osteichthyes, the pneumatic duct has been lost, the gut must be absorbed by the blood, or the gas must be absorbed by the blood. So they don't have that ability to regulate the swim bladder directly from the gut. Okay, they don't have that ability. And that's the osteichthyes, fishes in particular. Yeah. I think what's important is just to know that there's a difference between the two types of groups, and that the one is, if you can look at the swim bladder and the location of the swim bladder, that this group, let me just put the cursor on. What this group has to do is the oxygen can only be absorbed into the bladder from the blood system, and it can off gas from the swim bladder as well. And because of the swim bladder filled with air, it actually contributes to like a storage bag that it has with air in it that helps it for some gaseous exchange, especially when the oxygen concentrations in the water body go down. So it has this resilience. It has this resilience to deal with lower oxygen levels, and that's because of its swim bladder. Let's go back one. Gas is secreted into the swim bladder from the blood at the gas gland. Yeah, easy peasy. Respiration. How do fish take oxygen out of water? Fish gills are composed of thin filaments covered with an epidermal membrane that is folded into lamellae. And these are the filaments. So fish have got gill rakers. And you can see that these gill rakers and these bony plates are attached inside the fish's buccal cavity. And remember, they have an operculum that can help them regulate flow over these lamellae, over the gills. The lamellae, the gills themselves are covered with an epidermal membrane that is folded into lamellae. All these different folds in the gill. Oh, there's another slide coming, which I'll show you now. Richly supplied with blood vessels, located inside the pharyngeal cavity, covered with operculum in bony fishes. Elasmobranchs just have gill slits. Okay, so they constantly have these slits that are open. Elasmobranchs are the sharks, hey? Elasmobranchs are the sharks. And what a shark does is he doesn't actually have an operculum, so he has to ram the water through his mouth over his gills. So some sharks have to keep moving. Otherwise, they won't be able to get oxygen through their gills. Okay? Water must be constantly pumped over the gills. That's because you need to have this flow moving across the gills so that the water can be replaced and that there can be gaseous exchange between the water and the gills. A countercurrent system is found where the flow of the water is opposite to the flow of the blood. So you can see where the water direction flows in this direction across their gill filaments. So when the water flows across their gill filaments, the blood flow flows in the opposite direction, which gives the blood flow across the membranes of the gills, the lamellae of the gills. It gives it a chance for the chemical reaction to occur between the cells of the gills and the direction of blood flow. Okay, and as you can see with the gills like your lungs, the blood arrives deoxygenated. You can see it arrives with no air in it, no oxygen in it, and it leaves oxygenated. Okay, and the water flows against the direction of the blood flow. So the water will always flow into the gills and out. The blood will always flow into the back and run forward in each of the gill filaments. Okay, I haven't got it here and you don't need it, but how do they actually take the air out of water? What? How do they actually do that? Ever thought about that? How do the fish actually take the air out of the water? They use it through a chemical reaction where the gills and certain cells in the gills become charged. And because of the difference in the charges of the organism or the chemicals around the gills in the water, it can actually use the correct charge to cause the oxygen to diffuse out of the water into the cell, and then it can actually use that in the cell then to then be absorbed into the blood. So it actually uses a chemical reaction and charges to get the oxygen out of the water into its cells, and it actually uses chlorine. So they actually have a chlorine cell, chlorine, the chemical. They use that in their cells to help them charge. It becomes charged, and then it allows them to take the oxygen, which is itself charged, out of the water into their cells, and it can be diffused into their blood. Crazy, eh? Pretty cool. Okay, then we move on to osmotic regulation. You see, we're just touching on these different characteristics, okay, not too much detail. But you do need to go over them, please, guys. You do need to go over them, especially in your textbooks. Please go over them. What is osmotic regulation? Well, this is where you're trying to regulate. Remember, we spoke about the other day. We're trying to regulate the salt content inside your blood. Why would that be important? Because salt concentrations and differences in concentrations between two areas allows for the movement or diffusion of salt from one place to another. So osmosis and the osmotic ability of fish to regulate the osmotic potential of their blood is important, because what fish want to do is they use, all organisms use that potential. We have a high concentration of salt and a low concentration of salt to move things from one area to another area. So what do you do if you're a fish in fresh water? You need salt. And what do you do if you're a fish in salt water? You've got too much salt. You understand? And then what do you do if you're a fish that is born in salt water and then moves to fresh water? Or other way around. So that's catadromic migration, like the eels. The eels are born in the sea, they migrate into fresh water. What if you're a salmon and you're born in fresh water and you want to migrate into the sea? You have to have the mechanisms to allow you to regulate the salt concentrations in the water. Okay. So high osmotic regulators. Freshwater fish are hyperosmotic regulators. They must have a way to get rid of water that enters their bodies by diffusion through the gills. Because they use that osmotic potential, the salt concentration, to allow them also not only to move the salt, the concentration of salt moves water between your membranes. So guys, who knows what battery water is? If you go to a garage, you can go and buy water that's battery water. It's distilled water. Water that's gone through a machine to take out all of the salts from that water. Okay? It's pure water. If you drink it, what will happen to you? It's got no salt in it whatsoever. So if you drink it, because there's no salt in it whatsoever, the high concentration of salt in your body will start to move from your body into the water. So you'll get water moving from your body into your gut. And it's like taking alcohol or caffeine, and you will then urinate. So if you're thirsty and you drink battery water, which is pure water, you're actually going to do more harm to your body. You're going to be taking water and salt out of your body into that water. So even the salt that we drink the water that we drink has got some salt in it. And the salt concentration there has to allow the movement of water from your gut into your body. Okay, and that's what fish do as well. So freshwater fish must have a way to get rid of water that enters their bodies by diffusion through the gills. Water enters the bodies and salts are lost by diffusion. Water is pumped by the opisthonephrine kidney, which can form very dilute urine. So the opisthonephrine, remember we spoke about the different types of pronephros, mesonephros, opisthonephrous kidneys, and that's just to show you how advanced or developed they are. So fish have a particular type of kidney, and we're going to show you now in a moment, that allows them to excrete a lot of the water and keep the salt. In effect, that's what they're trying to do in fresh water, is excrete the water, keep the salt. Why? Because there's too much water around them. So a fish's body is saltier than the water. And how do you do that? You need to get rid of water, keep the salt. Which can form a very dilute urine. Salt-absorbing cells occur in the gills, and they actively move salt from the water into the blood as well. Okay, this is how they do it. So this is an example. Freshwater fish. Freshwater fish, food and freshwater comes into the gut. The gills actively absorb salt, sodium chloride, and water enters osmotically as well with it. So they're trying to absorb their salt, so they're taking the salt out with their kidneys, they're taking the water and salt into their gills, and then from their kidney, they have these features in their kidneys, the opisthonephrine kidneys, which allows them to then excrete the water, which is then excreted as dilute urine. Okay, that's quite simple. Marine fish have the opposite problem. What do? Food and seawater comes into their mouth. What do they then do? They actively secrete the salt and lose water out of the gills. So they're trying to get rid of the salt, but as they're excreting the salt, they're also losing the water. Okay, so in the marine environment, the fish is less saltier than the surrounding water. Okay, so what do? In their stomach, they passively absorb sodium chloride and water. So here's the same type of cells that excrete. Here they're actually absorbing sodium chloride. Here they're trying to get rid of too much salt. Okay? Then in their stomach, they absorb a lot of the water and the salt as well. But now he's got too much salt, so what does he do? So they've got, in their kidneys as well, they've got features that allow them to excrete high concentrations of salt. And the excretion of magnesium sulfate, a high amount of salt with urea and a little bit of waste. Okay, magnesium sulfate is voided. So why here we're talking about magnesium sulfate, and here we're talking about sodium chloride? Because sodium chloride, which is what you guys eat for table salt, is the dominant type of salt available in freshwater ecosystems, which they need. Magnesium sulfate is one of the major groups of salt that's available in marine ecosystems, which they don't want. Do you understand the difference? Here, there is not enough salt in the fish. The fish wants more salt. So he has to take salt in out of the water. He does it through his gills. He excretes water primarily. These guys, they don't want the salt. It's too much. So they come in and they excrete salt out of the gills, but also water, which they don't want to do. And how do they do that? Because osmosis, you can only move salt and excrete salt with some water with it. Remember, water always moves, the salt always moves from a high salt concentration to a low salt concentration. Okay, that's osmosis. And what we're trying to do here is these guys have got special abilities to excrete salt. And their urine is very salty. Okay. Okay, that's saltwater fishes. They're called hypoosmotic. So hyperosmotic, freshwater fish are hyperosmotic, and saltwater fish are hypoosmotic. They have lower blood salt concentrations than the seawater. They tend to lose water and gain salts. Marine teleos drink seawater. They drink. They take it up through their stomach. Remember, because they need the water. Salts are carried by the blood to the gills, where they are secreted by salt secretory cells. Other salts are avoided with feces or excreted by the kidneys. Okay. All right. So, guys, I'm just going to go through this again quickly. What time is it? Do we have? I think we run out of time already. 7 minutes. Okay. Let me quickly go over what we've done today. Locomotion in water. Fish are very good at utilizing water environments. Why? Because of their tails, their structure, their muscles. Very important. What allows them to swim fast? What is very advantageous for some species? Sharks, what do sharks need to do? Buoyancy. How do they buoy? Swim bladders, oil. Remember the coelacanth, the whole body is oily, oily, oily. Helps with buoyancy, okay? And their fins as well. They use their lobe fins to help them move around. Sharks have fixed fins. They can actually go down a little bit or they can come up a little bit. Okay. And then neutral buoyancy, swim bladder, respiration, the gills. You need to know about the filaments, the lamellae, countercurrent flow, hey? Countercurrent flow of blood against the flow of water. Hyperosmotic and hypoosmotic. Okay, freshwater and saltwater fish. Then, the last lecture we're going to have this week, which is tomorrow, is going to be on migrations. And then we're finished with fish. Okay. And I just want to show you this, guys, that we're going to talk more about the African fishes, African eels, because we have our own eels here. We're going to talk about different types of fish migrations. What are the different types of migrations? And we're going to look at the life histories of eels. And you can see what these guys do. Look here, for the whole of Europe, all the fish, when they're adults, they migrate from all of the different rivers out into the sea. And from currents, they end up, and they all recruit, and they all spawn in one part of the sea, close to America. And then when they're small larvae, the currents push the larvae back until they get back into the coast, and then they migrate back into rivers. Okay? These guys have got life cycles which carry them over 6,000 kilometers. Okay? One of the most threatened species or group of animals in the world because of the way we're utilizing. These guys have to have good rivers, connected rivers. They need to get access to the sea. They need to not be predated by aliens as they come into the water. They need all of these factors in place, which makes them very vulnerable. Okay? And eels around the world are also a very valuable commodity. Okay? They are, the value of the eel trade and the cost per kilogram of eel is greater than that of rhino. Okay? Very valuable fish from an economic and ecological perspective. And we have 4 species. We have the highest diversity of eels in the world, yet we know very little about them. We know very little about them. So that's what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Okay, guys, thanks. If you have problems with your